Wall Street, New York City, the 1890s. The most powerful financial district in the world, or the one that was becoming the most powerful, in the specific way that things become powerful when enough money and enough ambition find each other in the same few blocks. Every morning, in the offices of the Chemical National Bank, on Broadway, a small woman in a black dress arrived with a basket of documents and conducted the most sophisticated financial operation on the street. She was not there as a depositor. She was not there as someone's wife, waiting to sign something. She was there as a financial operator, buying bonds, lending money, negotiating terms, making decisions that moved markets. Her name was Henrietta Howland Robinson Green. Everyone called her Hetty. She was, at various points in her career, the wealthiest woman in the United States of America, and possibly the wealthiest woman in the world. The men who worked alongside her, the bankers and brokers, and financiers and speculators, who occupied the same buildings, the same streets, the same professional world, called her the Witch of Wall Street. They called her a witch because she was a woman who consistently outperformed them, who bought when they panicked, who held when they sold, who understood the long game when they were playing for next quarter, and they could not reconcile the evidence of her financial intelligence with their belief that financial intelligence was a male attribute. So they called her a witch because that was the explanation that required the least revision of what they already believed. She was also, by the time the legend had fully formed, the subject of stories that were simultaneously true and misleading. She ate cold oatmeal because she refused to pay to heat it. She wore the same black dress until it literally decomposed. She lived in boarding houses in Hoboken, New Jersey, and cheap hotels in New York, moving constantly to avoid paying property taxes on the properties she actually owned. She instructed her son to wear his trousers until they were ragged before buying new ones. These stories were true, and they made the world laugh at her. The crazy miser, the eccentric old woman, who didn't understand that the point of having money was spending it. What the world missed, or chose to miss, was the other story, the story of how a woman, in the second half of the 19th century, managed to build a fortune of $100 million in a world that was specifically designed to prevent women from doing exactly that. The story of someone who understood money at a level that made the men around her look like amateurs. The story of the Witch of Wall Street, which is not the story they told about her. This is that story. Henrietta Howland Robinson was born on November 21, 1834, in New Bedford, Massachusetts. New Bedford in 1834 was one of the wealthiest cities per capita in the United States, the center of the American whaling industry, which was, in the mid-19th century, one of the most lucrative industries in the world. Hetty's family, the Howlands and the Robinsons, were among the most established of the New Bedford Quaker merchant families. Her grandfather, Gideon Howland, had made a fortune in whaling. Her father, Edward Mott Robinson, had married into the Howland family and continued the maritime trading business. That was the foundation of the family wealth. The Quaker world that Hetty was born into had specific qualities that would shape everything she became. It was plain. It was principled. It did not distinguish between men and women. In the meeting house, both were equal before God. Both could speak. Both had the same spiritual authority. And it understood money, not as something to be ashamed of. The Quakers had no theology of poverty, but as a responsibility, a stewardship, something to be managed wisely and used well. The Quaker ethic toward money was, in some ways, the exact opposite of the showy excess of the Gilded Age. You could have money. You were permitted to have money, but you were not permitted to let money become a display, to use it to distinguish yourself from your neighbors, to build the apparatus of status that the non-Quaker world organized itself around. You kept it. You managed it. You used it for productive purposes. You did not wear it, or live in it, or spend it on the performance of having it. This is the philosophical foundation of Hetty Green's miserliness. And it is, when seen in this context, not eccentricity at all. It is a coherent ethical position about the relationship between wealth and character, one that she held consistently, from childhood to death, regardless of how much money accumulated around it. Hetty's mother was an invalid, a woman of fragile health, who was largely confined to her room, and Hetty was raised substantially by her father and her Aunt Sylvia. Her father was, by accounts of people who knew him, both a demanding and an educating presence. He read to her from the financial pages. He took her to his office and explained what he was doing. He treated her, from an early age, as someone who needed to understand how money worked, because money was what the family had, and understanding it was not optional. She was reading financial newspapers at age 6. By 8, she was her father's bookkeeper, not as a game or an exercise, but actually managing accounts, recording transactions, understanding what the numbers meant and why they changed. This is an extraordinary education for a child of any era, for a girl in the 1840s, in a world that was beginning to construct, with considerable ideological force, the idea that women were unsuited for the financial world. It was something else entirely. It was a preparation for what neither her father nor Hetty fully understood yet, but a preparation. She grew up in this world, reading the financial press, understanding trade and commerce, absorbing the Quaker ethic of simplicity and stewardship, and developing, alongside all of this, the specific financial instincts that would define her adult life. The instinct for value, the instinct for patience, the understanding that money is not made by following the crowd, but by being in position when the crowd is wrong. As she grew older, Hetty's education in finance deepened. She accompanied her father to his business meetings. She read everything, not just the financial press, but legal documents, contracts, bonds, the architecture of financial instruments that most people encountered only through intermediaries. She read them herself. She understood them herself. She formed her own opinions. By her 20s, Hetty Robinson was managing a substantial portion of her family's investments, not in the nominal, supervised way that some wealthy fathers allowed their daughters, but genuinely, actually making decisions, actually buying and selling, actually responsible for the outcomes. She was good at it, exceptionally good at it, and she was developing, through this combination of natural aptitude and rigorous practice, a philosophy of investing that was both simpler and more sophisticated than almost anything her contemporaries practiced. Her basic principles were these: buy when others are selling, specifically buy when panic has driven prices below intrinsic value. Hold for the long term, not the next quarter, not the next year, but as long as necessary. Live on income, never touch capital. Understand what you own. Never buy what you don't understand. These principles sound simple. They are not simple. They require a psychological discipline, the ability to be calm when others are panicking, to be patient when others are impatient, to trust your own analysis when every signal around you says you're wrong. That almost no one possesses naturally, and very few acquire through practice. Hetty Green possessed it naturally, and refined it through decades of practice. The markets of the Gilded Age were not the regulated, transparent markets of the modern era. They were opaque, manipulated, subject to the deliberate interference of men like Jay Gould and Cornelius Vanderbilt, who moved prices through rumor and pressure, rather than through analysis and value. In this environment, where the rules were made by the powerful and applied selectively, Hetty Green's strategy was not just sound. It was a form of self-defense. She could not manipulate markets. She was not part of the cartels. She was not in the rooms where the real decisions were made. So she did the one thing that cartels and manipulators
cannot protect themselves against.
She was patient. She waited. She held cash, while the manipulators moved prices in ways that made no sense. And when the manipulations failed, as they eventually always did, and the prices collapsed to what they were actually worth, she bought. This is not a complicated strategy, but it requires two things that are genuinely rare: a clear understanding of what things are worth, and the nerve to act on that understanding when the entire market is screaming that you are wrong. But before she could fully deploy these extraordinary capabilities, she had to fight a war, not a financial war, but a legal one that would define the next decade of her life and reveal, in the clearest possible terms, the specific obstacles that the world placed before women who wanted to control their own money. In 1860, Hetty's mother died, leaving her a modest inheritance. In 1865, her father died, leaving her approximately $6 million. But the real money, the Howland family money, the fortune that had been built over generations of whaling and trade, was controlled by her aunt, Sylvia Howland. Sylvia was elderly, childless, and had always been close to Hetty. Hetty's assumption, was that Sylvia's fortune would come to her. When Sylvia Howland died in 1865, she left a will that divided her estate, giving Hetty only the income, not the principal, and leaving the principal to various charities. Hetty was furious. She produced a second will, one that she claimed Sylvia had signed earlier, that gave Hetty the entire estate. The case went to court. It was, for its time, a landmark case, not only for the financial stakes involved, but because it involved one of the first significant uses of forensic document analysis. In an American legal proceeding, the opposition brought in experts, including professors from Harvard, who testified that the signature on Hetty's will was a forgery. The experts analyzed the signature using statistical methods, comparing it to known authentic signatures, and concluded that the probability of it being genuine was essentially zero. The court ruled against Hetty. She did not receive the Howland principal. She received only the income, which was still substantial, and the $6 million from her father. Whether Hetty forged the signature has never been definitively resolved. She denied it until her death. The historical verdict is divided. What is not divided is what the experience taught her, or rather, confirmed in her, that the legal system was not neutral, that the financial system was not neutral, that a woman with money and intelligence would be challenged at every turn by institutions designed to manage, to limit, to contain, and redirect what she was trying to do. She responded to this knowledge the way she responded to all opposition, by working harder, by being more careful, by building a position so strong that no one could take it from her again. In 1867, she married Edward Henry Green, a Vermont businessman who had made money in the Far East trade. The marriage was, by the standards of its era, unusual. Hetty had insisted on a prenuptial agreement, one of the first documented cases of a woman in America insisting on one that kept her fortune entirely separate from her husband's. Her money was hers. His money was his. What was hers remained hers. This was not romantic. It was strategic. Hetty had watched what happened to women who merged their fortunes with their husbands, who became legally, financially dependent, who had no independent standing in the world of money. She had no intention of becoming that kind of woman. The prenuptial agreement was her declaration of financial independence 3 decades before women had the political independence of the vote. After the marriage, Hetty moved to New York and began the work that would define the rest of her life. She set up her office, or rather, she set up in the offices of others, because Hetty Green never paid rent for her own office at the Chemical National Bank, where she became, over the following years, one of the most significant private investors in American financial history. She specialized in government bonds, United States government securities, at a time when the bond market was still being defined, and when the relationship between bond prices and interest rates and credit risk was understood by relatively few people. Hetty understood it
Completely.
in detail, better than the men who dismissed her. The Panic of 1873, the financial crisis that ended the first Gilded Age and sent shockwaves through American banking, was the event that established Hetty Green's reputation. While other investors panicked and sold, Hetty bought. She had been watching the markets and had seen what was coming, or at least had positioned herself so that when it came, she was ready. She bought distressed bonds at prices that reflected panic rather than value. She held them. She waited. When the panic passed, as panics do, eventually, the bonds recovered, and Hetty Green had made a fortune. On top of the fortune she already had. She repeated this pattern through the Panic of 1893, through the various market disruptions of the 1880s and 1890s. Each time she was doing what her philosophy demanded. Hold cash when others are greedy. Deploy cash when others are fearful. Buy what nobody wants, because it is cheap, not because it is popular. The philosophy was simple. The execution required nerve that very few people had. She also lent money directly to cities, to businesses, at a time when the banking system was less sophisticated and private lending played a larger role. When New York City itself was short of cash during a financial crisis, Hetty Green provided the loan, on her terms, at her rate, with her conditions.
New York City had to accept them.
Because Hetty Green had the money, and New York City needed it, and the negotiating position was what it was. She came to the Chemical National Bank. Every day, she brought a basket of papers, documents, bonds, correspondence, the physical infrastructure of a financial operation that spanned the entire country. She sat on the floor sometimes because she didn't have a desk of her own, and conducted her business in full view of the bank's other clients, many of whom were men who had considerably less money than she did, and considerably more furniture. By the turn of the century, her fortune was estimated at between $50 and $100 million. The estimates varied because Hetty kept no public accounts. She had no obligation to disclose her holdings, and she disclosed as little as possible. $100 million in 1900 is approximately $2.5 billion. In today's terms, she was, by any measure, one of the wealthiest people in America, not just the wealthiest woman, but one of the wealthiest people. And she was doing all of it while operating in a system that had been designed, legally and socially and financially, to prevent women from doing exactly this. The stories about Hetty Green's miserliness are legion, and most of them are true. She wore the same black dress until it was, by eyewitness accounts, genuinely falling apart. When she finally replaced it, she bought another black dress. She did not wear colors. She did not wear jewelry. She did not spend money on clothing or on anything if she could avoid it. She lived in boarding houses, cheap ones in Hoboken, New Jersey, in cheap Manhattan hotels, rotating between them with a frequency calculated to avoid paying property taxes on any single address. She did not own, in her own name, a comfortable primary residence, not because she couldn't afford one, but because she had decided that the cost of maintaining such a residence
Was not justified by the benefit.
She ate cold oatmeal. This is perhaps the most famous story, the one that appears in every account, the one that has become the symbol of Hetty Green's relationship with personal expenditure. She ate cold oatmeal because heating it cost money. This is true. What the story usually omits is that Hetty Green was simultaneously managing a portfolio that generated millions of dollars in annual income, and that her refusal to heat her oatmeal was not evidence of poverty, but of a philosophical position about the relationship between consumption and wealth. The philosophical position stated plainly, was this: money spent on comfort is money that is not working. Money that is not working is money that is not growing. Money that is not growing is capital being consumed, and consuming capital is the one thing that Hetty Green could not bring herself to do. This was not, strictly speaking, rational. She had more capital than she could possibly consume in multiple lifetimes. But it was consistent, and it was, in its way, the same quality that had made her fortune: the ability to defer gratification indefinitely in service of an accumulation that had long since exceeded any practical purpose. There is something worth noting here, something that the mockery of Hetty Green's miserliness usually skips past: the men of Wall Street who spent lavishly on clubs and yachts and maintained the full apparatus of Gilded Age masculine display, who demonstrated their wealth through conspicuous consumption at every available opportunity, were doing this in part because displaying wealth was how men, in their world, maintained their standing. The display was functional. It signaled to other men that you were worth dealing with. It maintained the social relationships on which business depended. Hetty Green could not use this system. The social world of Gilded Age finance was male, exclusively, deliberately male. No amount of spending on the right clubs and the right yachts would have given her what it gave the men who occupied them. Her savings were not only a reflection of her philosophy, they were also a recognition that the expenses which bought men access would not buy her access, that for her every dollar spent on the performance of wealth was simply a dollar wasted. The stories multiplied. She argued with laundresses over the cost of washing her petticoats. She negotiated with bakers over day-old bread. She kept precise accounts of every expenditure, every penny, every cent, with a meticulousness that was both impressive and alarming. She cut newspapers in half to save on paper costs. She recycled envelopes. She timed her visits to New York to avoid paying hotel rates on nights when cheaper alternatives were available. The press loved these stories, loved them the way the press has always loved eccentrics, and reported them with a glee that was barely concealed mockery. Look at the old witch, the stories implied. Look at how she lives. What's the point of all that money if you live like a pauper? The stories framed her miserliness as evidence of mental illness, as evidence of deep eccentricity, as evidence of something wrong with this woman who didn't understand how money was supposed to work. What the stories missed, systematically, deliberately, was the obvious question: was it actually wrong? Jay Gould lost his fortune. Many of the great financiers of the Gilded Age, men who spent lavishly, who built mansions and yachts, and maintained the apparatus of wealth at enormous ongoing cost, died with considerably less than they had made. Hetty Green died with more than she had inherited, considerably more, because she lived on income and never touched capital, because she bought when others panicked, because she refused to spend money on anything that did not generate more money. Her miserliness was not a defect. It was her investment strategy. And her investment strategy was the best one on Wall Street. Hetty Green had 2 children, a son, Edward Henry Green Jr., known as Ned, and a daughter, Harriet. She was, by accounts of both of them, in later life, a devoted mother, in the sense of being present, engaged, genuinely concerned with their welfare. What she was not, or not consistently, was a mother who understood that welfare sometimes requires expenditure. When Ned was a young boy, accounts vary on the exact age, he injured his knee. The injury was serious. It required medical attention. It required the kind of sustained, professional medical care that cost money. Hetty, according to the account that has passed into legend, and which is supported, with varying degrees of specificity, by contemporary sources, took Ned to a charity clinic, dressed him in rags, and presented him as a poor boy in order to receive free treatment. The charity clinic refused to treat him, recognizing Hetty Green, and she was told to take her son to a doctor who would charge for his services. She did not. Not immediately. Not quickly enough. The knee injury was not properly treated. The injury became worse. Eventually, as it had gone untreated for too long, the leg was amputated. Ned Green lost his leg, below the knee or at the knee, depending on which account you read, because his mother had not wanted to pay for a doctor. She was worth, at the time, tens of millions of dollars. This is the story that is most difficult to tell with any sympathy for Hetty Green, and the one that most requires something more than a simple judgment. Ned Green, in adult life, became one of the most extravagant spenders in American history. He bought yachts and cars, and women and art, with a lavishness that seemed specifically designed to compensate for a childhood of enforced austerity. He ran through an extraordinary portion of the fortune his mother had accumulated, not all of it, because even Ned Green's spending could not entirely erode $100 million, but a significant portion. The relationship between Hetty's pathological saving and Ned's reactive spending is one of the more psychologically coherent dynamics in this entire story. Harriet, Hetty's daughter, took a different path. She married a New York socialite and lived by the standards of her mother, lavishly. Both children, in their adult lives, appeared to be conducting a sustained argument against their mother's philosophy, an argument conducted in the language of expenditure rather than words. Hetty loved her children. This is not in serious dispute. She corresponded with them constantly.
She worried about them.
She was present in their lives, in the way that a mother present in her children's lives is present, which is to say, with full knowledge of who they were, and what they were doing, and what they needed. The knee is the hardest thing. It sits in the record as evidence of something. What, exactly, depends on how you choose to see it. Evidence of mental illness. Some historians have argued. Evidence of a philosophy taken so far that it consumed what it was supposed to protect. Evidence of the specific blindness that can develop in people who have built an idea into their identity, who have made a virtue of thrift, to the point where thrift becomes the answer to every question, including the ones for which it is the wrong answer.